All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us around the world. I'm Seth Ginsberg, co-founder and president of the Global Healthy Living Foundation, GHLF. We're a 25-year digital patient advocacy organization focused on improving access, trust, and understanding for people living with chronic disease. So I want to start today by setting a scene here. Just imagine it's 10:42 p.m. on a Sunday night. A patient has just noticed a new symptom. They're anxious. Their clinic portal won't respond until the morning. Their physician is well asleep. And now their family's worried. They're not waiting. Today, they're opening a large language model. And they ask, that moment, that quiet, that private, and that very unfiltered moment is now happening over 230 million times a week for health questions alone. With 7 out of 10 of those conversations happening outside clinical hours, this is not a trend anymore. This is not hype anymore. This is behavior. And behavior changes markets. So if you're a leader in pharma, medical affairs, digital strategy, or patient engagement, this should and needs to command your attention because AI has quietly become the first touch point for patients in their healthcare journey. It is the new front door. And patients aren't asking whether it's compliant. They're asking whether it's helpful. And whether we participate in that moment responsibly, intelligently, and collaboratively will shape trust, brand equity, and most importantly, health outcomes for the next decade. And at GHLF, we've watched patients navigate every wave of digital transformation, from blogs and forums and message boards to search engines to social media. And today, this is a little different. This is a lot different. This is interactive, it's personalized, and it's immediate. And it's happening with or without us. So today is no more about theory, it's about strategy. And it's about what this shift reveals about friction in our system and how we turn AI from experiment to infrastructure. And to have this conversation, we've brought together leaders who are not speculating about AI, they're operationalizing it. They're navigating medical rigor, compliance realities, digital transformation, and patient expectations inside some of the world's largest and most important organizations. These are the builders. So let's do a quick round of introductions and get into this super important and interesting conversation. I'll start just by sharing a little bit about our panelists today and kick us into what we hope will be a really robust conversation. Starting with Alex Condolian from Pfizer, Chief Medical Affairs Officer for Global Medical Engagement and Impact. Alex leads a medical and scientific omni-channel strategy and AI-enabling engagement all around the world, connecting data, insight, and medical rigor at scale. Alex is actively shaping how medical affairs evolves in an AI-enabled world. Pleased to be also joined by Jose Maria Chema Guido-Avila, known affectionately as Chema from Sanofi. Chema leads global Dupixent patient experience within respiratory for Sanofi. And with a background spanning digital marketing, omni-channel strategy, and generative engine optimization, Chema is thinking about something critical: how large language models interpret and surface health information. And he's treating AI platforms not just as tools, but as stakeholders. And lastly, we've got Richard Cassidy joining us from across the pond in the UK at Astellas. He's Senior Vice President of the RX Plus Business Accelerator, and he leads initiatives building independent digital health businesses designed to deliver measurable patient value well beyond traditional pharmaceutical products. Richard brings an engineering mindset to health transformation and solving problems systemically with scalable digital solutions. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming here. I want to move us right into the questions. And maybe, Richard, starting with you, let's begin at that signal level. When patients turn to AI at this scale, What does that tell us about gaps and friction in traditional patient support?
Yeah, thank you very much, Seth, and thank you for the kind introduction. I really appreciate that in your example in the beginning, you emphasized LLM rather than just saying AI, because that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the use of large language models. And obviously, AI is used in many different contexts within the practice of healthcare and medicine, but we're talking about large language models. And for me, I think what we're seeing through these numbers is a mixture of different factors. One is a large language model provides convenience. If I have a symptom that materializes at 10:42 on a Sunday night, I can go and ask the question and I can get an answer. So one is convenience. Cost is another one, depending on where you live in the world. Um, you know, you may think, oh, this isn't anything serious. I'm just going to, find out if I should spend some money and go and see a doctor about it. And then I think the other one is education. If you're somebody who already has a health condition and you're taking medication for it and things like that, and you notice a particular symptom, then maybe the information that you've already received from your physician, from the healthcare system, doesn't give you enough context for what that symptom might be. And you want to check, is this something that I need to do something about? Or, is this just a side effect from whatever medications I'm taking? So I think that education piece as well. So I think those three different elements. And I don't know about the three of you. We didn't talk about this previously, but I've certainly used it. I've gone on there. I'm fortunate that I work in the pharmaceutical industry. I know that I cannot put 100% faith in the response that I get, but not everybody knows that. And I think we'll get onto that a bit later, but I think that's a role where pharmaceutical companies in particular, working with partners, can add some value by ensuring or trying to ensure that the responses that people get are medically valid, and appropriate. So yeah, I think that's where we can start off.
Amazing. Yeah, and let's build on that actually. Alex, you want to talk a little bit about where the system is failing to meet these needs?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think great context from Richard, and just to build on that, right? I mean, like think about like some words you use, Richard, right? Convenience, cost, education, which we can translate into empowerment as well. Like that is friction that we all experience engaging with healthcare. And so, I think at a minimum, the signals and the pace that we're living through right now tells us that patients and HCPs, by the way, have found a less friction prone path to managing and taking control of their health. And on the one hand, that's exciting. And on the other hand, it can make us nervous. I think the bit that should be making us nervous right now is the speed that things are going at. You mentioned some of the data coming out of OpenAI at the beginning, Seth, but there's also Bain data that's saying 70% of patients globally go to AI or LLM specifically at time of diagnosis or treatment choice. There's IQVIA data saying that already, the vast or the majority, I'm not going to say vast, but the majority of HCPs are going to an LLM at least weekly for scientific or medical knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that what we're doing today lacks value. And let's talk specifically about how we support patients. It doesn't mean that we're not adding a lot of value in what we are doing. I think it is telling us that their need is bigger than what we are able to address alone. And I just think that's important because that doesn't define our value, it redefines our opportunity. And if you think about how people can use AI, they can get a lot of good knowledge and information summarized. If they get the context wrong, they get the answer not relevant and accurate in a way that might be ideal. And I think we've also got to call out that AI doesn't solve every problem. It doesn't necessarily help get the favor that sorts out friction in the system. It doesn't help us understand who to call in a big complex healthcare system or payer system in order to get an approval that we're seeking. And it also doesn't always hold our hand in times when we just need empathy. Now, empathy can be a bit in short supply in healthcare with all the pressure that is on right now, but there's still a key role for it. So I guess I would just sort of say, I think we need to read this as a critical moment where patients, HCPs, have acted, are acting, and it means we need to step up and we need to act. But, if we can match healthcare's rigor with tech's agility, if we can match possibility with proof, we often say healthcare moves at the speed of proof, then I think we're going to get to a net good outcome. And I think we can look at AI as being something we can build on, not saying we're competing with, saying we can build on, and something which, even with its limitations, is here, is being adopted, and is going to go further and probably go further quickly.
Amazing. Chema, did you want to just chime in?
Yeah,
Just
I
share a
wanted
little.
to, yeah, I was thinking about what both Richard and Alex were mentioning, because I think I love the concept of thinking of the patient on that moment of truth, because I believe that sometimes in the pharma industry, we tend to see the patients as patients only, like as a person with symptoms or with a disease. But what you described in the beginning, Seth, that is more a regular person, a consumer, someone who has a question to a specific situation, which in this case is healthcare. And it could say, it could happen the same to the doctor, right? So Alex, you were bringing the HCP side. If you think about the HCP or the doctor or the nurse or whoever that HCP is, they are also a human and a person, and they may have exactly the same behavior. They may be in a situation where, I don't know, they have hundreds of patients per day. Thinking about, for example, a GP, how many people do they receive? And they only have like a couple of minutes to receive them. And it's hard for them to keep track on all the diseases that are there, all the treatments available, and to remember the names of their sales reps that have been coming to visit them, plus the webinars and emails, etc., that they have receiving. So that probably prompts them at some point to say, what was the treatment that I was looking for? And then going to the conversational tool, whatever it is, ChatGPT or whatever LLM, and ask a question: what was the dosage of this treatment? What was the name? Can you remind me the clinical trial? And even further, there's also research done by, I think it was Fierce Pharma, together with Sermo. They were publishing some data about doctors actually sometimes use the LLM in front of the patient to translate scientific content or scientific concepts into patient-friendly discussions. And again, if you just think about the HCP as a person, as a human, they do have that exact need, right? So I guess that what I would like us to also consider moving forward in the conversation would be, how can we put into context what is that adoption ladder, if you want to call it like that, into AI? Because the more reflecting in your own journey, when you start prompting, when you start back in the day, a couple of years ago, when you started prompting, the prompts were much more simple. Maybe were just like a couple of words, a sentence, a very crisp question, and then you would take the answer, and maybe you will trust what the AI was telling you. But the more you become experienced in AI, your prompts become longer, and also the more skeptical you become about the AI. So there's going to come a point where patients reach a tipping point when they are so much educated about their disease, and they may be starting to question what the AI is telling them. So my question is, how can we be present in that moment to ensure that that the trust is there in the answer that they are receiving, because it's the right information that the AI is procuring for them, right? That's why, Seth, in the beginning, you were saying I like to think about the LLMs as customers, our stakeholders, because that's the point, right? So we need to ensure that that customer, that LLM, has the right information to avoid providing a fake news or something that is not correct in an answer to a doctor or a patient.
Alex, you looked like you wanted to make a comment.
I just love the spirit, right, of the opportunity, and I do think we need to recognize, like, this is going to challenge our systems, right, to adapt. And I sort of like might sort of build on your comment, Shemar, in terms of just sort of saying, like, the external environment is moving faster than what a lot of healthcare organizations are able to absorb right now. And that creates restlessness. And unless we can, address understandable fear, uncertainty, capability gaps that we all experience, as well as our colleagues are experiencing, then that restlessness is only going to increase. The fear of job security, the fear of job change is only going to increase. And if I go one more bridge on what you were saying, we all started with simple prompts. And I wonder how many people in our panel today and listening today would say, oh, I find LLMs much easier to use in my personal life than my work life. I think about this question every day. And I think work is more complicated than my personal life. The tasks I'm working on at work go on for months. They don't go on for, I want to book a holiday today. And I'm collaborating with people. So now I've got to work out, how do I collaborate with people and use the trick of AI to make me more effective? And by the way, in doing both those things, my job might fundamentally be redefined. And how do I embrace that? I just sort of think like it's a tension point. I think it's sometimes exciting, but I also think it's sometimes uncomfortable. And we're going to have to bridge it because I don't know we've got a pause button. I don't know that there's any put the genie back in the bottle. And we can have concerns about biases in data. We can have concerns about accuracy, and adoption has already happened. And I loved your phrase at the beginning, Stefan. I wrote it down, but this, when behavior changes happen, markets are going to follow. I think we're in a reality where we are not becoming irrelevant. It's just that we have an opportunity or a need state right now to maintain and grow relevance.
Yeah, and Chema made mention of a word, I'm glad he did early on, which is trust. And a lot is riding on trust. And you mentioned using AI internally, for work versus personal. And, as a leader of my team, there's concern the workforce will outsource his thinking.
Yeah.
And we can't have that happen. But then you transfer that to, influencing people's day-to-day thinking and behavior with these conditions. We can't outsource that either. But we have to play an important role in shaping it in the direction of science, medicine, health, what's in the best interests of people. And unfortunately, there are headwinds, systemic, global headwinds in terms of, technologies desire and what the tech platforms want and need out of this versus what Jane Patient wants and needs out of it. There's a big bridge between those. We could go on here all day here on this. It is an exciting and interesting topic. But I think, just to wrap up this part of it, the reality is AI isn't replacing healthcare. It's filling vast amount of white space in patients' lives today. So, Richard, let's talk a little bit from experiment to infrastructure and kind of what that looks like. How do we move AI from innovation decks and pilot programs and things we've been testing into this like essential infrastructure for patient communication and engagement?
Yeah. Well, I think it's already there. And actually the question for me, Seth, is how does pharma engage more with that? Because the communication is happening from the large language models to the patients. And we have some input to that, but it's entirely indirect and out of our control. That information is being gathered from vast training data sets that are coming from all over the place. So I think the interesting question for me is how can pharma companies get involved to ensure that the data sets that are being used to train the large language models are built on scientifically robust information. And I think that goes beyond individual pharma companies because these training data sets are huge. And one pharma company doesn't have enough data on its own to be able to have any influence on something of that scale. And I think looking at federated data sets, how to share data across organizations in a way that is, pre-competitive, etc., is one of the things that we can look at so that you have large language model responses that are effective for people's needs when they go to use the tools to get information. I think the other interesting thing about this is thinking about how the environment that large language models operate in may change. There was a Forbes article earlier this week or last week about the use of large language models for mental health purposes. And there is a lot of conversation going on in the US about large language models not being appropriate for that purpose because of the way they're designed. And is there some way that if the large language model detects that a person is asking questions that might suggest depression or whatever, that it could then reroute them in a sense into a more specific model that is designed to support somebody who is asking questions from the perspective of a mental health challenge that they might have. So I suppose the thing to say is that the environment is changing, both the technical environment, the regulatory environment, they're changing. And a little bit back to Alex's point, how do we keep up with the pace of change to make sure that we are able to effectively contribute to that change? And how do we collaborate with other pharma companies, with tech companies, with the AI companies, et cetera, to ensure that we are providing a robust set of data and information? So there's a huge challenge. It's a very, very different way of working potentially. But it is important because, at the moment, the data that people get from large language models is hopefully good, but there's a lot of hope in there because sometimes it can be complete nonsense or even dangerous in some cases.
Well, hey, look, when the internet came out, I was this, student thinking, oh my gosh, access to all the information I need in the world, right?
Yeah.
Fast forward all these years, it's the biggest sewer of humanity, technically, by volume. And on another technical note, and to pick up your point, Richard, technically, this is all moving at the speed of light. I mean, there is no going back, Alex, and putting that genie back in the bottle. But Chema,
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit. We could build on this here because I'd love your thoughts and perspective on what changes internally. If you could share a little bit when AI becomes strategy rather than just experiment.
Yeah, happy to build on that. So I think the critical point we're leaving, it's on the I think pharma has been preparing for this moment for a few years. Because let me tell you why. So I remember back in the day. Now, Seth, you transferred my mind into a few years ago when we were. If you remember, everything started when we were using visual aids into iPads, and then we would give or in PDFs, right? So I think to me that's when the digital transformation for the pharma industry started, right? And then I think every moment back then until now, until a few years ago, until a few months ago, everything was following a shiny toy syndrome to me. Pharma would be like, oh, now we can do websites. Let's do websites. Now we can do emailing. Boom. And we were chasing shiny toys with this branded mindset, right? So I need to put my brand because the model that the pharma industry follows has been successful for many years, right? You have your sales reps visit the doctor, then you have the MSLs also visit the doctor, and then that model it's successful, right? It's profitable, it has proven to drive business, to drive patient outcomes, everything. So back in the day, we were trying to transfer that branded push into digital. But I think now AI is pushing us to rethink our strategy because now it's not. If you start thinking about how is my brand appearing in LLMs, you're going to be looking at a very niche space, which is branded prompts. When a patient is asked, it's when a patient or a doctor are asking about your question. But the biggest, like the huge amount of information of prompts, it's probably not even related to your brand. For example, if a patient has diabetes, they're not going to be asking for a specific brand. Maybe they're going to be asking for symptoms, for diagnostic tests, for doctors around me, for all of those things. So again, to me, this AI is forcing us to think of a strategy where we think beyond the brand, first of all. So we have been talking about this for several years, like how do we go beyond the pill solutions and then patient-centric, etc. I think this is forcing us now. So that would be my first point. Rethinking that strategy from pushing branded messages to convince a doctor to prescribe to actually, and even further, I need to go one step further because I'm in patient experience, and I'm telling you, I have learned this in the past few years of this experience. I think it's not just about convincing the doctor to prescribe, but also convincing the patient to accept the therapy, because the patient may not be ready. Sometimes we take it for granted that the patient is going to say, oh yeah, I'm sick, I have a disease, doctor is giving me this, I'm going to follow. They don't, and especially now with the AI. So if you put those pieces together, if you elevate it at a strategy level, you need to think about, number one, how do we move from awareness and pushing messages to influencing a new stakeholder that we have no idea how they behave? So we need to understand how they behave, how do they pull information, etc. Influence. Second part of the strategy is understanding how our previous stakeholders or main customers are engaging with this new stakeholder, with this new AI that we're trying to influence. And then the final point of the strategy is which is to me very important, is in the technical side, how do we think beyond our own ecosystem? How do we think beyond making our website appear, but how do we think about, do we need to work with regulatory bodies? Do we need to work with patient advocacy groups to ensure that the right information reaches this new stakeholder and this patients, right? So it's not just chasing to go there first and appear there in the summaries, because that's not even benefiting the patient or the doctor. It's more about how do we holistically work with those, like I said, authorities, like a patient advocacy group, health authorities, medical associations, to ensure that the right content is driving the summaries that the AI, the LLMs are providing.
Or to borrow a phrase in Japan, they use the term civil society leaders.
I love that. Yes, I love that. Exactly. So that's it. That's from my side what I think.
Amazing. And I mean, clearly, this isn't a technology issue anymore. This is like a systems and an organizational issue, like for sure. Alex, you look like you'd like to make a build or a comment here.
Well, I mean, everything Gemma said, I completely agree with, and I do think it's going to challenge the mindset we bring to the table, right? I mean, like we have to have the courage to reimagine what healthcare is about to look like, or what healthcare actually does look like. And if I get a little bit more contentious in my comments, I would sort of say, like, our business as usual playbook has stopped working. Like, we used to develop these strategic plans and think we had a view of 3 years out. I mean, that deck will be irrelevant in 6 months with the current trajectory, because the speed of external change is ahead of what we can imagine. So unless we're willing to reimagine, we've got a problem, right, on the strategic front. And then I'm going to say, I think we also need to reinvent how we think of innovation. Like, the way we partner is rapidly going to have to evolve. I think, especially when we're talking about patients, we need to understand that, patients, HCPs, they're not trying to get on the agenda of an innovation committee to get their great idea approved. They're just acting. They're not going to an IT department and putting a ticket in to get permission to use an AI platform. They're just acting. And I call that out because I think we need to challenge ourselves about, are we addressing the need that we've assumed people have, or are we addressing the desire people have for a better life? And that is a challenge to us on how we start co-creating in an environment where some part of innovation has just been democratized. I think that's exciting, right? And I want to call that out. I just also want to give one more anecdote, which is like, we might be nervous about deploying AI ourselves externally, but we shouldn't underestimate how much we can learn by deploying AI internally, getting it right, enhancing the external experience through our people benefiting from AI. And then when we have confidence, going external. Like the internal playground for innovation is safer, right? And this is something which I think we might also want to, provoke in how we're thinking about reimagining or reinventing how we're going to move healthcare forward.
Well, but you used such a great word, courage, before. And I really want to underline it because in my book, there are no more courageous human beings than the scientists waking up every day to battle cancer or get us out of COVID or everything in between. And now applying that courage to the technological realities that we're waking up in, even though our consultants all told us they were coming 5 years ago, kind of thing. I just think that's the reality. And I'm also hearing important words like co-creation and partnership with industry and external stakeholders who are the authenticators of so much of these things, whether they're the HCPs, the patients living with the diseases, obviously the technologists and the innovators, working the ones and zeros. But Richard, let's pivot here to you for a moment here to just dream a little bit about what it looks like if we get it right and what that kind of connected AI supported journey could and should look like here in the future.
Yeah, for me, the starting point is really what is the value that can be added? And if you think about the heart of the healthcare system is the interaction between the physician and the patient. Looking at how will AI change that interaction, because it already is. Shared some examples earlier of that, but understanding where the way that we work and the solutions that we bring from pharma can also enhance that relationship. So there are so many examples out there at the moment of how large language models and other AI tools are being used for that purpose. But I think one of the biggest opportunities is really to provide a better continuity of care and also continuity of context for the patient. Because typically, as an individual interacting with a healthcare system, you'll go and see a physician, you'll see the pharmacist, you'll have follow-up appointments, that kind of thing. There are huge gaps in between those where you're dealing with the condition you have, but you don't really have any easy way to have an interaction. And I think what the future can look like is having that frictionless interaction through the duration of whatever condition it is that you're trying to manage for yourself. And pharma companies can play a role in that. Can pharma companies bring the entire solution? I don't think so. It requires that co-creation, that collaboration, and that partnership with other stakeholders to enable that. But I think that's the way the world's going. We've already talked about speed of change. Pharma companies historically have done everything themselves. Yes, sure, we can do this. We'll throw lots of people at it and plenty of money at it. We'll figure it out. It doesn't work that way with this. This is changing so fast and it is very unfamiliar. So just sharing my perspective from digital therapeutics. There's a study in Lancet a couple of weeks ago called the Tricorder study, and they're looking at using a heart failure solution in various primary care settings across the UK. And what they found from this, it's thousands of patients. What they found from this was diagnosis. Technologically, it worked. The biggest thing that held people back from actually using it and implementing it was integration with the workflow, i.e., integration with how they work day to day and how they interact with patients. So that change part of it is going to be the piece that we really need to understand and get right. That's an example from digital health. The same thing applies to AI. How do we make sure that people feel comfortable using it? How do we make sure that both the physician and the individual feel they can trust what's coming out of it? And I think we have a big role that we can play in building that trust and allowing for that seamless integration into the workflows.
Amazing. We are past our halfway point. I hope that I've warmed us up a little bit with these some of these bigger picture questions, because the hard balls are starting to come into the Q&A chat, which is exactly what we want, and encourage folks to do that. Maybe before we get to these, and I'd love to turn to those in a moment. I do want to name one thing that I think many of us here in this discussion are familiar with, and I want to name it directly, and that's compliance and legal. And I just want to toss this one up to the whole panel. And it's not meant to be a loaded question. It's just a direct one. Are they slowing, are the legal and compliance teams slowing progress, or are they evolving alongside it?
Let's see what we all get to on it. And this, can we throw regulatory authorities in? Can we throw payers in? Right? Let's go to all the stakeholders that have to align for healthcare to move forward. It might just be that the biggest advancement we see in the forthcoming 5 years is driven by regulatory reform. Like, we're in a period where if we put ourselves in the seats of any stakeholders that we have to work with to get something deployed and benefiting healthcare, we put ourselves in their seat, we're going to understand that they are catching up to technology, just like we today are talking about catching up to technology. No one's quite worked it out. And if you're sitting in a big life science company today, our whole value is intellectual property. We have to make sure our core value is protected. And if that slows us down, we have to play a role in solving what is not yet solved, because we are defining what the future is going to look like. And so I just want to level set that. I think when we take the empathize with key stakeholders in a very complex ecosystem that we live in healthcare, I think we might take a new lens as to what it means to get a green light, what it means to protect an organization or protect patient safety before we do something that's out of control or wild. That would just be one first context. Secondly, I mean, I don't know, Rich and Chema, what you feel, but I feel right now we are doing a lot. So we are finding ways to navigate with legal and compliance and trying to understand how regulatory reform is rapidly evolving. Have we worked out how to do every idea that comes to our mind? No. But I'm not sure that we should right now be going for the big, bold moonshot when we haven't even sorted out the fundamentals of learning, the fundamentals of AI fluency, the fundamentals of, do we really understand bias in LLMs? Do we understand what its impact is on healthcare? So I just want to sort of placate and sort of say, I personally don't feel like I've been held back. What I do feel like is I need to be investing with all partners in the ecosystem to understand their uncertainties, because every part of this innovation value chain today is something we are discovering together rather than a playbook that already exists. And so I sit on a little bit of a pragmatic view that it's not a bad thing that we're having to answer difficult questions today, even if it feels frustrating at times.
Chema, Richard, would you like to comment?
I was gonna say, I feel I have similar experience. I don't think, and again, I'm coming back to that digital transformation journey that I referred to, because back in the day when I was a digital manager a few years ago, and I would try to do a paid search campaign and approve it through MLR, it would be a nightmare, because they were like there were many questions, because we never spent back in the day. Again, a long time ago. I look younger, I know, but I have been in the industry for, but for some time. But back in the day, I didn't spend the time to explain them why a paid search campaign, what we were trying to do, and that the intention was actually to educate, not to advertise a brand. But I think that learning curve is helping a lot now, because now for me, the MLR team, compliance, MLR, legal, regulatory, everybody's now they understand better how these digital technologies work, and that's helping on the flexibility they have to think, to not just be like super strict on, okay, this is what it has to happen, but rather think how we can find solutions that are compliance to provide information. In this case, for example, if we want to try to influence a LLM that provides a summary on a disease awareness question, there is a parallel in keyword research or paid search, right? So that's what I think that the connections are happening, at least in my world. But I do think that we need to be so this is moving at the speed of light. However, the regulations are not moving at the speed of light. And I believe there's going to come a point where regulations are going to come. And this is when the hard conversations are going to happen with the compliance teams. Because if there comes a regulation and they say AI, like similar to Facebook, right? Facebook doesn't allow targeting for disease and etc. If a similar regulation comes for LLMs, then everything that we have built is gonna drag us down, and we're gonna have to renegotiate it, find different ways or alternative ways to work around, not to work around, but to stay compliant and still deliver the business objectives.
Yeah, maybe I can build on what Alex and Chema were saying. I have a perspective on this, looking at it through the lens of innovation. Similar to both of you, I don't have an experience where I feel it's held us back what we're doing. What I feel is that we're being asked the right questions to ensure that what we're developing is truly going to make a difference and add value. And if you look at it from the point of view of innovation, people feel that innovation is best achieved when you're completely free to do whatever you like. I don't hold that view. Innovation is achieved, necessity is the mother of invention. Innovation is achieved when you have boundaries and borders that you can't cross, because it forces you to think about things. And when it comes down to regulation, compliance, etc., those rules are all there for a very good reason. And what I find is, if you go back to the basics about why the rule is there, and as Chema was saying, you talk about what you're trying to achieve and how it's going to make a difference. My experience is that most of my colleagues will explore and be willing to explore a way to get to a solution. What scares me is, with the use of LLMs for coding, etc., anybody can spin up a health or wellness app within probably a couple of hours and then put it out there for anybody to use. And there's no restriction or constraint around that. And people don't necessarily understand that those kinds of solutions have not been built to the same rigor as the kinds of things that a pharma company or a med tech company might put out there. So I think, for me anyway, the regulation, the compliance, that way of thinking and questioning is actually critical and fundamental to achieving innovation that truly makes a difference and delivers value.
Definitely. And from a systems level and government, there's a lot of room for regulation right now. Truly. And again, like, who's waking up thinking about the patient's well-being? Who's waking up thinking about protecting, well, look, there's we don't have to direct our attention to active litigation right now against social media companies, but I believe it is very relevant to this discussion because it serves as a watershed legal precedent for what happens when the technology companies really go into it. Alex, were you about to hop in on something here, or?
I'm just fiercely agreeing with you, but I'll give you one anecdote. I'll give you one anecdote that you triggered in my mind, and people might have seen this in the news. It was reported in the last 2 weeks or so, but there was some research done. I think it was German research. It was based on Google search summarization, happening in Germany, okay, against healthcare questions. And 5% of citations are from YouTube. Now,
Yeah.
the interesting thing about that, I think, is that doesn't answer a question of whether it's good or bad. We traditionally assume it's not good. It just challenges our mindset of what good or bad might be.
Right.
Right.
And we just don't want our patients waking up consulting the groupthink of Reddit to make a decision.
Right.
Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this was called out in the Q&A, just in terms of folks' view and PubMed scientific journals as like the trusted source for LLMs, because these are peer reviewed and evidence based and trusted. So if folks want to comment on that as being like a foundational mission critical element to training it, it relates to another question about basically garbage in, garbage out, piping the exhaust into the air intake. I like that in terms of this emergent state that we're in with AI right now. AI generated content that's trained on its own content is really going to complicate trust. And this was pointed out in the comments as well. But would folks want to speak to these topics?
Yeah, I can give a first try to addressing this, because I saw the questions and I was like, oh, these are really interesting questions.
Right.
I think because I'm going to refer back to the point that I was making in the beginning about the adoption ladder, right? So we need to understand where are our customers in which stage. If they are more in a situation where they prompt shorter, and then they trust whatever the AI is telling them without caring without even checking the sources, or if they are becoming so sophisticated that they actually go and then they check the sources. I can give you another example. I saw an interview, a qualitative interview of a patient, one of these very super advanced cost consumers, let's say, that he has a lot of experience, etc. And I saw the prompts. They were huge, etc. It was fascinating. And at the end of all the prompting, he was asked the question: did you trust the answers? Because he checked every source. He was checking that it was from a validator source, etc. And he dismissed some of the YouTube, Wikipedia, Reddit things in the beginning. And then when we asked him, when the question was like, "What are you going to do now?" He didn't say, "I'm going to take a decision and I'm going to bring this information to my doctor," or anything. He said, literally, "I'm going to go to Reddit to hear from other people," because I think Reddit is now making things real, and people are placing a lot of trust in Reddit because they're hearing from other people. Well, at least they believe that it's other people that are experiencing the same. So all of this is because thinking about our ecosystem, an AI is probably going to choose the same source to answer a question for a doctor or for a patient, for a healthcare professional or a patient. They may go to PubMed, and then it's just the way that it's going to be served is going to be different from how it's served to the patient or to the consumer, to the LLM, to the HCP. I guess I saw another also comment very quickly about bioethics and LLMs. I think at some point we need to ask the question: is not if we can we do this, but rather should we do it? And sometimes I'm in between those two. Like, should we influence LLMs? Should we go into influencing the scientific evidence to ensure that their information is accurate? And the question is, what happens if we don't? If we don't, like Richard was saying, there may be someone else coming out, spreading this information, and then actually hurting the patients. Sorry, that was my first try. I hope I answered the question, or I gave you at least something to
But
build
that's
on.
super relevant. If you're a manufacturer of any serious drug for any serious disease, to recognize where it fits in this bigger paradigm of what the user, the patient, the human, the doctor for that matter, are consulting and being advised by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can I maybe build on that? I think I'm going to go back to the PubMed because I think it's such an important sort of, principle. I mean, I'm still going to trust PubMed. I'm still going to trust peer review medical research. And the vast majority of people are not going to be able to make sense of typical publications that sit in the medical literature. And just like prompting lacks context, so too does reading only one article lack context. So I think we've got a question like, is that really accessible for a patient? We started with patients. So I don't yet today see a reason why our scientific principles should be undermined. We should hope that we can accelerate research and development and make new discoveries without question, but I'm not sure we want to walk away from the scientific principles that have got us to such robustness, trust, and rigor as we've got today. But then on the flip side, I think we sort of need to get a little bit in the feet of patients, right? If I'm reading a journal publication that sort of says, oh, this condition is prototypically presents with polyneuropathy. I mean, like, what does that word mean? Like, go to Reddit and you might actually understand what that word means. What that word means in how someone describes an experience in life that someone else can make sense of. Now, it's just a different part of what I think we have to get comfortable with a more patient-driven, patient-empowered healthcare system might look like. And it's not perfect. But you know what? Healthcare today is not perfect either. So, I think that's going to be an interesting sort of balance where I do think, especially in the world we live in today, we have to stand strong on scientific principles. We cannot walk away from that, and we should keep doubling down on our belief. It doesn't mean that we don't need to evolve. Like, I think, Timmy, you picked up before, like where are these LLMs being fed their information? And, are we publishing quickly enough? Are we publishing in the right journals that feed the right LLMs? Is publishing even the way to influence an LLM? Or maybe we have to get onto YouTube more than what we're doing. I think they're issues of responsibility that we can lean in on, right? They're not things that we can walk away from, but they are things that we can test and learn. And maybe where you started at the beginning, Richard, like as an industry, like we can learn together, right? We're all facing a little bit of this, like how to help play a key role in responsible, reliable, science-based information in an environment that's fast evolving.
And it also just speaks to the need now more than ever, industry needs to show up with its expertise, with its scientific rigor, with its pack of lawyers, with the full package of what it takes to wrestle these most complicated health challenges in our world, despite a healthcare system that isn't always rooting for anyone in particular success. So I just want to echo that and give you a hearty amen, Alex.
I think,
Richard, yeah.
Seth, the question that I have is, I don't know enough today to be able to say whether if I go to one of the LLMs and I ask it a question, whether its training data set is accessing PubMed and a multitude of scientific journals or not. I also don't know how much weight it's putting on that information versus the information that it's pulling from YouTube or other sources. So for me, that's one of the biggest questions. And I think that's where maybe pharma companies or the pharma industry can help by providing, I don't know what that would look like. Let's say an approved data set for particular disease areas that the regulator has signed off on, something that the LLM companies can use to train their models. I don't know, but today I just don't know enough about where the information is coming from. And sure, I can ask, what source did you use for this information or that information? But what I don't know is, was there a better source that it could have used that it also had access to? So it's that lack of certainty, which gives me pause when it comes to using it. Having said that, I was skiing a couple of months ago, hurt my shoulder on the bus down the hill. I was in the large language model saying, okay, I think I've done this to my shoulder. Give me a 6-week physiotherapy regime where I don't need any specialist equipment, and tell me where you got the information from. And I kind of looked and thought, yeah, that sounds okay. And shoulder's working fine. So
yeah, because it started by telling you you're still a good skier.
Exactly.
Sorry. But good. Look, we've got here just a few moments remaining, so I did want to just open the floor. I know we've got a few other questions coming through. Happy to continue this conversation beyond today, especially on places like LinkedIn, where it's a safe and important place to have them. But Chema, Alex, Richard, like let's go around for some just closing sentiments, some thoughts, given the gravity of this conversation and how much of it remains to be had among us and as an industry. I'll start with you, Chema, if you want to.
Yeah. I was just browsing through the questions very quickly to see if if I could find some inspiration there.
Well, I
I
mean, one
think,
good point is I do want to call out the question about where do we get patient involvement, patient voices into the process internally? Um, Mission
yeah, I think
critical.
I can use that as inspiration, but also something that's been in my mind since the beginning of this conversation was we didn't have the chance to discuss the implications of in our behaviors now that we are becoming heavy users of AI. There was, you probably saw these stories last year where there would be people that ask a question to the LLM for even the most basic things. Like I remember seeing a story of this guy that he became so the self doubt was so huge on him that he would even go to a party or to a bar and he would be asking ChatGPT, what drink should I order to look cool in front of my friends, and to ask such a basic question, showing you how much he didn't trust in himself anymore. I wonder how I wonder if that we also need to consider how is that going to affect HCPs and patients, because a HCP that is self-doubting, if he or she are making the right choice for the patient and they have to validate all the time with that LLM, that to me is where we didn't make it right. We actually went in the wrong direction, or on the other side, if we end up having patients overwhelming the system because they keep thinking that they have symptoms and then they keep asking, are you sure, ChatGPT? Are you sure that I don't have this? Because I read this here. And then they end up overwhelming the system because of something that doesn't exist, right? So I guess that to me is something that we need to consider ourselves into how much when we start trying to influence those LLMs and we start finding those sources, we need to consider how do we as well think about the human factor, not to go into that wrong direction.
Amazing.
That's it. Yeah.
Alex, Richard, any closing thoughts here in our last 2 minutes?
I'll go quickly and just say, to give a parallel of today compared to how we do research and development, I really believe we are in phase one of digital impacts on healthcare. We're far from reaching the maximum tolerated dose. Therapeutic window is wide open, but it's not going to stay open for long.
Brilliant.
So we have to act, but recognize we're at the beginning. I love questions on bioethics and others. I wish we had time to get into it. We're working out the basics at the moment. So imagine what it's going to look like when we're past phase three and moving into market. Richard.
Yeah. My closing thought on this is when I think about it sort of more broadly, the LLMs that people are using are a little bit like the most knowledgeable primary care physician you could ever see, mixed with a kind of a used car salesman mentality where they'll tell you what you want to hear. So you're not getting the best information. Maybe you'll get some useful information. What I'd like to see us get to is a point where the LLM is working more like an ideal primary care physician, where you'll get the information you need. And if it feels that you need to speak to a specialist, it will redirect you to a specialist, whether that's a human physician or a different AI model that's particularly designed around whatever condition it is you're talking about. And pharma has a role to play in both of those things, both getting to that ideal primary care physician approach with the LLM and to helping design those specialist models that are related to particular conditions that people might have. And we're all, the three of us are here on this call. We're all from different companies. I think every pharma company is looking at this. nobody has the answer yet because this is changing so fast, and we just have to stay on our surfboards on the wave and try not fall off, and we'll get there eventually.
Yes, what a good nod to our Aussie panelist here. But let me close us out with a quick zoom out, and thank you, Richard, and to everybody. Really, every era of healthcare has its defining interface, right? That clinic, then became that web browser, then became the smartphone, then the social channels. Today, it's the prompt. And inside that prompt, patients are asking for clarity, for reassurance, and for guidance as we're unpacking. And we need to bring rigor, we need to bring empathy, and we need to bring this responsibility into that space so we don't lose control. Because if we do it right, we can gain relevance, and relevance becomes trust. So thank you very much to our panel again. Thank you to Reuters Events Pharma for hosting such a fantastic discussion. And thank you all for joining today and for leaning into what comes next.